TBR really is more of a suggestion. This woman throws in another plot twist. Fool me twice, shame on me. This series is dead to me. I've read quite a few romances this year, but this couple was by far my favorite. Just go home, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to put up with this crap from these people. A very humorous take on shape-shifting, that's all I'm gonna say. I read 10 books. Now, of course, you'll remember I did come up with a summer TBR back a few months ago, and I read absolutely none of them. I read twice as many books, like numerically, as was on that list. I just didn't read any of the books on that list. If nothing else, this summer has proven that I am a mood reader. So the first book I picked up back in May was Red Queen, which thank you so much Book Talk for alerting me to this awesome series. That was only a little sarcastic. Most people I've heard don't feel like it really lives up to the hype. I thought it was a great book. I mean, was it on the level of like those classic YA series? No, I mean, I don't think it'll like go down in history or anything, but it was really good, you know what I mean? I thought it was unique. I thought it was a cool like magic system. It's basically like, sorry, that's my dog. It's basically like based on blood, which as someone interested in like medicine and stuff, I thought the scientific implications of that were really interesting to think about. But basically, if you're born red, like red blood, then you're just a regular old non-magical human being. But if you're born with silver blood, then you have the possibility of getting all these different like magical powers. So basically it is like your classic YA fantasy rebellion sort of thing between warring factions of the population, but with kind of that interesting, or what I thought was an interesting twist on how the magic actually worked. Also, I would totally put this book in like a royalty core category, which I thought was really fun to read, and like the castle where a lot of it takes place was just so much fun to imagine, and yeah, I thought it was great. So then we move on to Glass Sword. I have so many emotions. Okay, so first of all, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but Victoria Aveyard has really taken this series as an opportunity to solidify a reputation of being one of those authors that throws in a huge plot twist at the end of every book. So at the end of the first book, again, I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but I felt like an idiot. I mean, truly, I just felt so dumb, but in a way that made me want to keep reading, you know what I mean? It was like, oh my gosh, the tables have turned. And then we got to the second one, and aside from kind of like a slow couple of chapters in the middle, it was really good. We were introduced to a lot of really interesting characters. We got to see more of like the world that it's placed in, and it was just a lot of like new elements that really added to the story. And so I'm getting to the end of the book and I'm like, okay, I'm loving this, and she's setting it up for a really interesting third book, and they're gonna go on this awesome quest. I am a Percy Jackson fangirl at heart. So I love a good quest. We got to the very end, and I was so excited. And then, fool me twice, shame on me. This woman throws in another plot twist at the end of book 2 that literally ruined everything. Everything. Oh my gosh. And again, I won't tell you what it is, even though I want to. End of book 2, she now completely flips the narrative, and book 3 is set up to be 100% a trope that I cannot stand. Like, I hate it. I literally was like, I'm not gonna read this book now. This series is dead to me. So yeah, that is as far as I got into Red Queen, and if you make it through Glass Sword, maybe you'll understand why. And it may totally not be as big of a deal to some other people, and that's fine, but for me, it's just like, I knew I wasn't gonna be able to get through it. So, excellent first half of a series, but just no. Moving on. Let's see. Oh, okay, something happier now. A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow. Oh my gosh. I loved this book. It was so good. I will 100% admit to reading this because of the cover. It has a gorgeous cover, but it is just as beautiful on the inside, okay? If not more so. No, it's a really stunning cover. I don't think it could be more so. Basically, like, super quick rundown. This is a YA, like, coming of age type story with some romance in there. And basically, this girl named Leela is supposed to be getting ready to graduate high school and then take over her family's bakery. And it's this really famous Cuban bakery in Miami, and she's super excited about it. And then her grandmother dies, which that's not a spoiler, that like happens I think before the book actually starts. And that just really throws her like totally off course, and she doesn't really know how to deal with it. So her family basically ships her off to the UK for the summer to hang out with their family there and just like deal and be with herself and kind of find herself again. So that's the gist of the book. So many good things. First of all, this story's depiction of grief, I personally thought was so good. So good. Like, I know for so many people, and it wasn't even just grief, but just like any really bad thing that happens in life. I feel like so many times we expect our grieving process to be linear and to have like certain stages, and so often it does not go that way, and it's more of like this curly cue, and you're like, you feel like you're backtracking and like one step forward and like two steps back and that sort of thing. And I felt like this book did a really good job of just portraying grief and loss. It's just something that she's constantly grappling with, and it's constantly changing, you know what I mean? And it's like she's learning about herself as she's kind of dealing with this loss and this trauma. And I don't know, I thought it was really human. And something interesting is that the author, I know, has spoken about the fact that in the middle of writing this book, she lost, I think, 2 people who were really important to her. And so she literally was like living and dealing with loss as she's writing this book. And that totally comes through. Like, you 100% know that the person writing this story has like gone through this type of experience and knows what they're talking about. So I just thought it was very like down to earth and very like relatable. And also the cozy vibes. So I did have this book listed in my cottagecore recommendations video. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But it's because it just has such wholesome aesthetic vibes. It's like, it's set in the English countryside in this cute little English village with all this old brick architecture, and the aunt and uncle that she's staying with, they own this cute little inn, and the guy who's like the love interest, his family owns a tea shop. I mean, come on, like, how much more cozy and quaint can it get? It cannot get any more, I'm telling you now. This is the book if you want like all of the warm feel. So next up we have a non-fiction book, and that is More Than Enough by Elaine Welteroth. Wow, I still like, I'm so grateful for this book. Man, I haven't talked about this a ton, but I've been at kind of like a crossroads in my life, I guess, recently. Especially professionally, I was feeling pretty lost a few months ago, and I read this book and was completely blown away. Like, I don't know if you believe in this type of thing, but I'm a Christian, and I 100% know that the Lord brought this book into my life at the exact moment that I needed it. Like, so needed it, and didn't even know how much I needed it. So this book is written by, like I said, Elaine Welteroth, and she was the editor of Teen Vogue back a few years ago. She was like the youngest person and the second Black person to be like a full-on like lead editor at Condé Nast. And so like, and she was also like, I want to say 29, I think, when that happened. So basically a total trailblazer. And this book is basically the story of her life thus far, and like how she made it to that point, how that experience affected her, what she took away from it, what she learned, and just like the decisions that she made to get there, some of the mistakes that she made along the way. It's stunning, truly. Like, she is now one of like my top 10 people, like if I could invite dead or alive to a dinner party, you know, I would want to speak to Elaine. Like, she is a boss. So I'd highly recommend you read her book. I kind of flipped back and forth between the physical copy and the audiobook, which she narrates herself, so it's even better, and I love you, Elaine. I'm such a stan. Okay, so the next book, it's funny, like, so if Elaine's book felt like, you know, kind of talking to an older sister and having her give you advice and help you through your big problems in life, then With the Fire on High kind of felt like I was listening to a younger sister. So basically, this is a story about Imani, and she's a high school senior. She has a daughter who I want to say is like a year or 2 years old at the time, and she's living with her grandmother, and they're just kind of like raising her daughter, and she's going to school. It's like, even though yes, her life is like, she's obviously got like a very specific experience, a lot of the issues that she's grappling with are like classic high school senior questions of like, what is my life gonna look like? Am I gonna go to college? Am I not gonna go to college? Like, how am I going to pay for it if I do? What am I gonna do if I don't? Like, all of these big questions that 17, 18-year-olds in the US have to deal with. And so just being further complicated by all this other stuff going on in her life. But she's an amazing chef, and that is like her centering force in her life, is that she loves to create these really awesome, amazing dishes. And she ends up taking a cooking class and then going on this big trip for that class, and kind of realizing along the way that this thing that she just thought she was like had a knack for, essentially, might actually be like her life's calling, essentially. And so it was such a good book, and it was one of those books where it stuck with me so long after I finished it. Like, even now, it's like Imani feels so real to me, and it's like her presence is still lingering in the air. To me, that is like the ultimate mark of like a truly good book, is if the character like stays even after the book is over. It like stays with you, and you just can't seem to shake it. So it's funny, like so many of the decisions she was like grappling with, I just wanted to like grab her by the shoulders and be like, I know what you need to do. And of course she would get there a few chapters later, but it was just so funny because, you know, even though our lives are very different, a lot of the questions that she was asking herself are ones that like any 17, 18-year-old would be asking, and I was having to ask myself just a few years ago. And so because I'm like a little bit older now, I was just like reading the book or listening to the book and being like, listen to me, I'm trying to tell you what to do. And it just felt like I was like her big sister, like trying to help her along. I don't know if that's silly, but it was just a really sweet book. That was honestly probably the best book that I've read this summer, just because it stuck with me so long and like really affected me deeply. But I still have a lot of good books to go through. Okay, so the next book I read was a graphic novel. Actually, this was the very first graphic novel. Okay, this summer, this was also just like a huge summer of firsts for me. Like, I read my first audiobook, which was A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow. I also read my first graphic novel, which was Glasstown by Isabel Greenberg. Now, okay, first of all, so this is like the dust jacket, but underneath, is that not the most stunning book you've ever seen in your life? If it is not, I would be very curious to see what like your definition of the prettiest book ever is, because for me, this is it, okay? I have never, it's so pretty. It's so beautiful. Even the inside, look. Okay, now I'm done. I don't know if this book will appeal to everyone the way that it did to me, but basically, I was obsessed. Capital O, capital everything. I was obsessed with the Bronte sisters when I was in high school. I thought they were like the coolest trio of sisters to ever walk the planet. I thought they were amazing. I did school projects on them. I read their books. I just like, oh my gosh, I could not get enough of them. And so, like many authors, they were writing long before they were actually published. And so there's a lot of like juvenilia is what it's called. When you have just like kind of these unfinished like short stories. And so basically Isabel Greenberg took all of that work that they had accumulated as children but like never really finished, and she turned it into a graphic novel and like illustrated it and everything. But the coolest part is that like the Brontes are also in it, so it's like the story of them coming up with these worlds and then like going into the worlds. It gets kind of trippy actually, but it's so fascinating and very like intellectual, because it gets into stuff like for example, the author's relationship with her subject matter and her stories, and like the point at which the author stops being in control of the story and the story kind of takes on a mind of its own. It was a very fascinating, and I don't know, I thought it was amazing, but I don't know if that's just because I was so obsessed with the Brontes or if it was truly just that good of a book. Personally, I think it was both. Like, I think it was that, you know, I had that long-standing love, but it's also just an amazing work in its own right. So if you're into graphic novels or you would like to start reading them, I would highly recommend that one. Next up, I shamelessly will admit, I was just trying to tack on another book for the readathon that I did in June. I read a play and it was very short. It was maybe like less than 100 pages. But it's called Steel Magnolias, and you may be familiar with that because it was turned into a movie in, I want to say the 90s. Super famous movie with like every awesome Hollywood woman ever. I'm talking Dolly Parton, I'm talking Julia Roberts, I'm talking Sally Field. But I never realized it was a play, and so I was like, you know, it's short, it's the end of the month, like, I'm just gonna read it. Oh, exquisite. Anyone who is a writer, in my opinion, should read this play simply as like a study in dialogue. So if you're not familiar with the story, it's basically set in the South, and it's back in the 80s, I think. And so it's about this group of women, and it all kind of centers around the like hair salon where they all like get together and get ready. So Dolly Parton's character, that's how I am gonna forever see her in my mind. Dolly Parton's character owns the salon, and so all of actually the entirety of the play is set inside the salon, and in the movie it kind of like extrapolates to the periods in between that and kind of shows you what's going on outside. But the play is like all taking place in the salon, and you're kind of learning about these characters' lives through their conversations. But yeah, it's a story, it's funny, it's heartbreaking, it's just like every emotion. It's so good. I was actually shocked. It was written by a man, and that really surprised me. No, like, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like, it's such a deeply feminine play, and for me, like someone who's, I don't know, I moved around a lot, so I don't necessarily have as strong of an attachment to like one certain place as I feel like most people do in life, but my family is from the South, and so all of my relatives are like extremely Southern, and I kind of identify that way. And obviously, like, it's not representative of every Southern woman, so I'm definitely not saying it's like the quintessential Southern experience, but it reflected to me like a lot of the women in my life, like particularly my grandmother is like a classic strong Southern matriarch, and that's what all these women are. It's really like hardcore, like tough as nails, like Southern women, you know? But yeah, the dialogue is so funny, so thoughtful, and I don't want to like say too much of the actual plot just because like I don't want to give anything away, but it's so good. Like, just read it. That's all I can say. Just read it. Oh, okay. Next, I read Tokyo Ever After, YA romance, Princess Diaries, but make it Japanese. Like, that's basically how everyone's been summing it up. I would say that's a pretty good summary, but I would tweak it a little. I would actually say this was an even more satisfying version of the Princess Diaries. And what I mean by that, I was obsessed with those movies, okay? So don't worry, I'm not shaming them. But like in those movies, Mia's dad had already passed away, so she never really got to like know him. But in this story, her dad is still alive, and so on top of her kind of like discovering that she's a princess, she's also getting to like build a relationship with her father. So this girl named Izumi, she is growing up in California with her mom, and she doesn't know who her dad is. She's never met him, and one day she just kind of happens to stumble upon the fact that he's actually the crown prince of Japan. And she gets in contact with him, and he invites her out to Japan to like get to know him. I think the only thing I was really worried about with this book is I was worried that it would be like too much like the Princess Diaries, because I was so obsessed with those growing up. I've probably seen them 100 times, so I know them by heart. I don't need to read like a retelling of them. But this was not that at all. Like, it really was a very similar premise, but then it was totally its own thing. Like, for example, rather than her like staying in the States, like in Princess Diaries, she goes to Japan and takes like her princess lessons and learns all about the customs and things while she's there. And that's a huge added layer of pressure, obviously, because it's like she's just learning this stuff for the first time, and she's having to deal with like press hysteria and everyone just kind of like ragging her in the tabloids, and even like a lot of her family members not really accepting her because she's not like really Japanese. So yeah, it's really, really tough, but there's a romance, and I think like that was really unexpected to me, just because again, in the original Princess Diaries, there was a romance, but it wasn't like the focal part by any means. Not in the first movie anyway. Now obviously then we got Chris Pine and but no, like in the first movie it was kind of like that wasn't really the point. And obviously the romance wasn't the only point in this story either, but it was a huge, huge part of it. And my favorite couple of the year. I'm proud to say I've read quite a few romances this year, but this couple was by far my favorite. So like healthy, but like still complicated enough to make it like emotional and kind of a star-crossed lovers situation, but not too much. I did find myself getting kind of frustrated because everyone was so hard on her. Like the whole time, she's just doing her best. I mean, come on, people. She's learning all of this for the first time. She's never met her father. She's never been to Japan. She doesn't know anything about like how the country works for like regular people, let alone like the added on standards and expectations of like the royal family. So it was just a lot at sometimes, and I definitely was like yelling at her sometimes, just being like, just go home, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to put up with this crap from these people, like just go home. But I'm glad that she didn't. And actually I found out that there's a sequel. It's already been announced. It's slated for 2022 and I'm so excited. Okay. I'm calm. Okay, what am I talking about next? Okay, next up I read another graphic novel, Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. Stevens? I think it's Stevenson. Also, amazing. Not as good as Glasstown in my opinion, because like I said, I have seriously deep emotional ties to that story. But this was also really great. So if you haven't read it, it's basically like told with like the villains as the protagonists, so it's like a kind of classic superhero evil villain type of story, but then where the main character Nimona is like an intern or like apprentice, I think, to the supervillain, and it's so funny. Nimona's character was hilarious, and actually she reminded me so much of my college roommate my senior year. I like texted her and I was like, hey, you have to read this, and she did, and she loved it. There's also shape-shifting. That is a big part of the story. I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to like ruin the fun, but a very humorous take on shape-shifting. That's all I'm gonna say. And lastly, I debated between this one and With the Fire on High for like my top favorite of the summer. So this was like a close second, and that was Witch Hat Atelier Volume 1. Oh my goodness. So if you watch my manga reading blog, then you already kind of know about my experience with this, but I really wanted to try reading manga again, summer of firsts, and so I called upon my new friends from Bookstagram and got some of their recommendations, and Witch Hat Atelier was one of them. So I found it, I like read the Kindle Unlimited version on Amazon. The way that I think the summary described it was that it was a mix between Harry Potter and Kiki's Delivery Service, and that is like the most accurate description ever. It is so magical, so perfect, so whimsical, like from the drawings to the story itself, all of it, it was like, it transported me into the book. So basically, if you have not read the series, it is about this young girl named Coco, and she dreams of becoming a witch, but in this world, it's thought that only certain people have like the disposition towards magic, and so since she's like ordinary, she's not supposed to be able to practice it. But of course, as you could guess, through a series of events, which I won't reveal, she ends up getting to become a magical apprentice essentially. And the magic system in this world is like maybe my favorite magic system ever. Like, it was genius, and it's like when you find out how it works, it's like that's kind of a big part of it, is that nobody really knows how magic works except for witches. And so I don't want to spoil it because it was just like so like whoa when I found out, but it's just so like, oh, it's so good. I've never come across another like fantasy that had this particular take on it. So I've only read one volume thus far, but I'm so excited to pick up the rest. I feel like it's gonna be a good fall read, you know, because it's kind of like magical but not like spooky, which is my vibe personally. I'm a scaredy cat. So I'm very excited to get my hands on the rest of them. I just have to figure out where to find them. So that is all 10 books that I read this summer. I'm super proud of myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to all of my opinions. Let me know down below what your favorite book was that you read this summer, because I'd love some more recommendations. Whoa, that was Harley. Are you okay? He's fine. Anyway, I'd love some recommendations. As always, I want to be as helpful to you as I can, and life is hard. You know it, I know it. And so if there's any way that I can be encouraging you or praying for you this week, let me know. I would be happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye.